The wind sliced through the night with howls that sounded like distant screams, while heavy snow fell, burying the world in a suffocating silence. The forest surrounding them was a dark, threatening mass, with the trees bending under the weight of the ice. Each gust of wind brought with it a different sound, the cracking of branches, the scraping of snow against the wood of the cabin, and something else, something Kenneth couldn't identify. Imposing and isolated, the cabin stood as a bastion against the chaos of the storm. The wood, already worn by time, creaked as if complaining with each blow of the wind. The yellowish glow of the candles in the fireplace leaked through the fogged windows, unable to dispel the overwhelming darkness outside. Inside, the warmth felt powerless against the cold that seeped in, bringing something more. Kenneth sat in the chair closest to the fireplace, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the flames. Alicia, beside him, held her hands together as if trying to warm not just her fingers, but something deeper within herself. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken words and memories neither wanted to relive. There was something in the air that made the atmosphere even more oppressive, a nagging feeling that they weren't completely alone. Kenneth lifted his eyes to the window, drawn by a shadow that seemed to move outside. He knew it was impossible to see anything through the darkness and the blizzard, but the persistent sensation that something was hidden in the forest wouldn't leave him. Alicia noticed his unease. "What is it?" she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. Before he could respond, a sound echoed, a low noise, like a moan or scratching, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. Alicia stood slowly, as if afraid to make a sound. "Did you hear that?" she asked again, now her eyes fixed on the door. Kenneth hesitated before rising. The sound returned, closer this time, hard to distinguish between a moan and something clawing at the wood. Something was out there, struggling, against the storm. A question hung between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. What could be trying to survive on a night like this? Before we continue, take a quick moment to check if you're subscribed to the channel. If you love dogs and enjoy hearing stories about them, you won't want to miss any videos. The silence of the cabin was almost as oppressive as the storm outside. Kenneth and Alicia had been there for 2 days, but the weight of the past seemed to have traveled with them, infiltrating every corner of that secluded refuge. Alicia knew Kenneth needed to break free from his inertia, but it wasn't easy for him, not after everything that had happened. 4 years ago, the couple's lives changed forever. Emily, their 17-year-old daughter, died in a car accident on a rainy night. Kenneth had been working nearly 300 miles away when he received the phone call that shattered his world. He never forgave himself for not being there to protect her. Guilt consumed him, turning him into a shadow of the man he once was. Alicia, on the other hand, found the strength to carry on. Despite her pain, she knew Emily wouldn't want to see them wither away. She tried to help Kenneth, but over time, she realized he was trapped in a cycle of self-punishment, unable to accept what had happened. Alicia believed a new environment might help him, even just a little. That's why she suggested the cabin, a place away from the daily grind, lent by an old friend. It wasn't completely isolated. There were other cabins and houses scattered throughout the area, though far enough away to make them feel alone. Access was relatively simple, which gave Alicia some reassurance. For her, the setting represented a chance to start over. For Kenneth, however, the silence brought forth the thoughts he wanted to avoid at all costs. Now, while Alicia prepared dinner, Kenneth stood by the window. The darkness outside was nearly impenetrable, but he couldn't pull his gaze away. Since the sound they heard earlier, the muffled moan or scratching against the storm, he felt an increasing sense of unease. The noise had vanished, but the feeling that something was nearby wouldn't leave him. Kenneth took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension. Everything in that place seemed to amplify what he felt inside: loneliness, guilt, and an inexplicable fear. He knew, in theory, that there were people living not far from there, but the weight of the silence made it seem like they were miles away from any other living soul. Alicia, on the other side of the cabin, called out to him distractedly. But he didn't respond. His attention was fixed on a shadow that seemed to move among the trees. It could just be his mind playing tricks, or maybe something was watching, waiting. Alicia insisted. this time with a firmer tone. "Kenneth, are you listening to me?" He turned slowly, but before he could answer, a noise echoed again. This time louder. It wasn't the wind or the ice. It was something different. The silence of dinner was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional sound of the wind against the windows. Kenneth barely touched his food, lost in thought, while Alicia stared at the table with the same lack of appetite. The tension between them felt as dense as the cold air surrounding the cabin. Then it came back. The sound. A low moan, almost muffled by the wind, echoed so subtly that Kenneth questioned if it was real. Alicia stopped cutting her food and looked up at him, who was already standing, facing the door. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely rising above the crackle of the fire. Kenneth nodded and slowly walked to the entrance, his heart racing with each step. The sound again. A moan, this time clearer, like a cry for help coming from outside. He hesitated with his hand on the latch, but Alicia approached, gently touching his arm. "Open it," she said firmly. Kenneth took a deep breath and pulled. The door opened. The cold rushed in like a wave, sharp and brutal, but what caught their attention was the figure that appeared in the doorway. A German shepherd, thin and trembling from the cold, watched them with desperate eyes, carrying something small and fragile in her mouth. Kenneth took a step back, surprised, while Alicia let out a small gasp of disbelief. The dog was a picture of suffering. Her coat, which should have been black and tan, was dirty, matted with snow and mud. The bones of her ribs were visible beneath her thin skin, and her entire body shook, exhausted. But her gaze, there was something in it that made them pause. It wasn't just despair, it was perseverance. She had braved the storm to reach them, carrying what they now realized was a puppy in her mouth. It was as if she wanted her pup to be saved, as if her own life didn't matter anymore. Her eyes conveyed that message. Without thinking twice, Alicia stepped forward. "Come here, girl," she whispered softly. The dog hesitated for a moment, but upon sensing no threat, took a tentative step inside. Kenneth quickly took the puppy. From her mouth, a small bundle of fur that barely moved. It was as cold as the wind outside. Hastily closing the door, Alicia crouched down to examine the mother. "She's freezing," she said urgently. Kenneth already had the puppy in his arms, trying to warm it up. "They won't survive if we don't do something now." Alicia improvised a bed near the fireplace with blankets and pillows, creating a space for the dog and her puppy to settle down. Kenneth grabbed the leftover pieces of cooked meat from dinner that were on the counter. The mother and puppy ate, with a ferocity that broke the couple's hearts. It was clear they hadn't eaten in days. As the dog and her puppy finally relaxed, the warmth from the fire began to restore color to their wet fur. Alicia gently ran her fingers along the mother's snout while Kenneth watched in silence. He couldn't help but wonder how they had made it here, fighting against the storm, and what else this relentless winter might be hiding. Exhausted, both dogs fell asleep. The mother curled around the puppy, protecting it as best she could. Even now that they were finally safe, Kenneth remained seated, observing the scene. But his mind wouldn't quiet down. The look in the German shepherd's eyes seemed etched in his memory. The courage to protect her puppy at all costs. Something had brought them there, and Kenneth couldn't shake the question echoing in his mind. How had they survived the blizzard? And what else could be lurking in that darkness? The day had yet to dawn, but the first rays of sunlight were already breaking over the sky. The faint glow from the embers in the fireplace gently illuminated the interior of the cabin. The silence was only broken by the sound of the wind howling through the trees. It was then that the couple was awakened by a persistent sound. The dog, who until then seemed exhausted, was standing up, scratching at the door repeatedly, as if something urgent was calling her from outside. Kenneth opened, his eyes confused while Alicia turned in bed, waking slowly. The sound continued, growing more frantic. "What's happening?" she asked, sitting up with difficulty. "The dog," Kenneth replied, already getting up. He watched as the dog pressed her paws against the wood, letting out small whimpers of distress. "She wants to go out," Now? In the middle of this darkness? Alicia questioned, worried. But the dog's behavior left no room for doubt. She wouldn't stop until she was let out. "I'm going to follow her," Kenneth said, grabbing the coat that was hanging on the chair. He unlocked the door, and the cold wind rushed into the cabin, bringing with it the fresh scent of snow. As soon as the passage was cleared, the dog darted outside without hesitation. Kenneth glanced quickly at Alicia, who only nodded with a concerned look before he closed the door behind him and followed the dog. Outside, the snow blanketed the ground in a thick layer, and the cold was biting. The forest appeared as a maze of dark shadows, but the dog moved forward with determination, stopping from time to time to look back and make sure Kenneth was following her. He didn't know where she was going, but he felt it was important. Not far from the cabin, Kenneth spotted something that made him stop. A few meters ahead, almost hidden under a pile of snow, was a small, motionless body. The dog ran to the spot, letting out low whimpers as she desperately licked what appeared to be another puppy. The little one was in critical condition. Its body trembled slightly, and its breathing was so weak that Kenneth had to kneel down to see that it was still alive. The puppy's fur was soaked and covered in snow, and its frozen skin looked like it was on the brink of collapse. Kenneth didn't waste any time. He scooped the puppy into his arms, wrapping it in his coat to protect it from the cold. "Come on, girl. We have to take him back," he murmured, while the dog followed closely, her eyes fixed on the little one. Neither Kenneth nor Alicia could imagine there was another puppy. Even still incredulous about what had happened the night before, they acted quickly. Alicia had already changed the soaked blankets and improvised another bed next to the fireplace when Kenneth came through the door with the puppy in his arms. "Is he alive?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. "He's very weak, but he's still breathing," Kenneth replied as he carefully placed the puppy near the warmth. Alicia began to gently rub the little one's body with a soft cloth, trying to warm him up, while Kenneth prepared a bowl of warm water to rehydrate him. The two worked with urgency, the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire and the low whines of the mother. Finally, the puppy let out a weak whimper, and his eyes opened. Slightly, Alicia sighed in relief while Kenneth relaxed his shoulders. The dog approached slowly, licking the little one gently before lying down beside him and the other puppy. It was as if, in that moment, she could finally rest. Kenneth stood watching the scene. The mother, now reunited with her two puppies, protected them as if nothing else mattered. But as Alicia adjusted the blankets, Kenneth walked over to the window. The forest appeared quiet, but something bothered him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over yet. What could have driven this dog to face all of this? And what else could be hidden beyond those snow-covered trees? The timid winter light streamed through the cabin windows every morning, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The presence of the dog and her two puppies had completely transformed Kenneth and Alicia's routine in an unimaginable way, where silence once reigned supreme. The soft sounds of the little ones exploring their surroundings and the movements of their mother now filled the space with new energy. Kenneth, who had previously spent much of his day sitting by the window or lost in his own thoughts, began to venture outside the cabin more often. The need to care for the dogs pushed him to resume tasks he had neglected. He started chopping firewood regularly, ensuring the fireplace stayed lit to warm the little ones. He also improvised bowls for water and food, sharing leftovers from their meals with the animals. These small actions began to spark a change in Kenneth. For the first time in years, he felt a purpose that extended beyond daily survival. The way the puppies depended on him for warmth, and the trust the mother dog placed in him as she watched his movements awakened something he thought was lost, a sense of responsibility and care. Alicia noticed the transformation almost immediately. Kenneth, who had seemed distant and absorbed, was now more present. He spent long minutes beside the puppies, watching them play, and talked about them with an enthusiasm Alicia hadn't seen in a long time. This filled her with hope, a feeling she hadn't experienced in ages. The presence of the dogs also brought unexpected moments of connection between the couple. During the nights, while the puppies slept, snuggled up to their mother by the fireplace, Alicia and Kenneth would sit side by side, chatting about the little ones and sharing stories that had long been kept to themselves. It was as if the animals had become a point of union, a bond that reignited their communication. However, despite the growing comfort, there was something Alicia couldn't ignore. The look in the mother dog's eyes, even in her moments of rest, remained watchful. Her gaze swept the surroundings as if searching for something or someone, vigilant, as if danger still lurked nearby. Kenneth began to notice this too. Sometimes, while chopping wood or stepping out to fetch water, he felt an inexplicable chill, as if he were being watched. It was a strange sensation, hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. Although the cabin was now filled with life, the couple couldn't shake the impression that something more awaited them. The cabin was located near a trail commonly used by fishermen, hikers, and campers. It was not unusual for someone to pass by from time to time, stopping to ask for directions or a bit of water. Kenneth and Alicia never minded these occasional visits. In fact, these encounters brought a little life to the solitude of the place. That morning, while Kenneth was chopping firewood, two men appeared on the trail, coming from an unusual direction. They walked slowly, dressed in tattered clothing, and carrying worn backpacks. Something about their demeanor made Kenneth feel uneasy. The dog, who had been resting near the cabin, immediately stood up. With her fur bristled, she positioned herself between the puppies and the strangers, growling softly. The men stopped a few meters away. The taller one, looking thin and nervous, raised his hands in an attempt to sound friendly. "Those dogs are ours. The mother ran away, and we came to get them." Kenneth narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "You just showed up here at the cabin. I don't believe they're yours." The second man, stockier with a thick beard, stepped forward, ignoring the warning in Kenneth's eyes and the dog's growl. "We're telling you, it's our dog. Give her back." Kenneth stood firm. "I've already said no. They're under my care now." The two men exchanged glances. The thin one tried to insist, but before he could speak again, the cabin door swung open. Alicia stepped out with a shotgun aimed directly at them. "You've heard what he said," she stated firmly, not taking her eyes off them. "Now get out." The men backed away slowly, but the stocky one threw a last cold glance over his shoulder before disappearing down the trail. "We'll be back." Kenneth remained in the same spot, watching until they were out of sight. He felt a chill run down his spine. He and Alicia had never felt threatened by anyone on the trail before, but now the air seemed heavier. When he returned inside, Alicia was putting the shotgun back in its holder, but her face revealed her worry. Those men, they seemed dangerous. Kenneth nodded, looking at the dog, who was still watching the door with her hackles raised. Something told him that the danger was far from over. The days following the appearance of the two men were restless. Kenneth and Alicia remained vigilant, feeling that their return was just a matter of time. The dog, alert, seemed to share the same sense, often patrolling the cabin with her gaze fixed on the trail. Then, on a cold afternoon, while Kenneth was chopping firewood beside the cabin, he spotted the two men again. They walked with threatening strides and faces etched with hostility. Kenneth stood his ground, holding the axe firmly in his hand. The dog, sensing the intruders, began barking fiercely, charging toward them with her fur bristled and teeth bared. "We came to get what's ours!" shouted the taller man, trying to sound authoritative. But Kenneth didn't flinch, standing firm as the dog continued to intimidate the men. "You don't have anything here," Kenneth replied, his voice sharp. That moment, Alicia stepped out of the cabin with the shotgun aimed directly at the two. Her expression left no doubt. She was ready to protect their home and the dogs. "That's enough. Leave now," she ordered, unhesitating. The men backed away. The stockier one took a step back, but before departing, he shot a cold glance at Kenneth. Leaning in a bit closer, he whispered in a grave, threatening voice, "This isn't over." They slowly retreated, disappearing down the trail. Kenneth stood still, watching them with the axe still in hand, while Alicia remained alert, the shotgun steady. Inside the cabin, the silence was heavy. The couple knew this wasn't the end, and the danger still lingered around their home. The days following the confrontation brought an eerie silence to the cabin. However, it didn't take long for that tranquility to be shattered. One morning, while Kenneth was checking the stacked firewood behind the cabin, he found a note stuck to a nearby tree. It was handwritten, with large, shaky letters. "You're going to regret this." He showed the note to Alicia, who felt a chill run down her spine. "They're watching us," she whispered, glancing out the window as if she could see the men hiding among the trees. In the following days, more notes appeared. Some were more straightforward. "Hand over the dogs." Others were more threatening. "You have no way out." Each message increased the tension inside the cabin. The dog, restless, barked frequently at night, as if sensing something was amiss. Kenneth was convinced they couldn't continue like this. "Alicia, we need to go to the sheriff's office. This has gone too far." She agreed, but there was apprehension in her voice. What if they get even more violent because of it? What if they come back while we're gone? Kenneth took a deep breath. He knew Alicia was right, but he also understood they couldn't just wait for something worse to happen. Meanwhile, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The notes on the trees were proof that they weren't alone. The danger was no longer a distant possibility. It was right there, lurking, waiting to strike. After days of tension, Kenneth and Alicia decided to seek the police with the anonymous notes in hand. The authorities initiated a discreet investigation, and soon enough, they had answers. The two men were the sons of a dog breeder known for abandoning animals in remote forests, leaving them to fend for themselves. The mother dog and her puppies had been discarded as worthless, and upon surviving, they became targets for the two men, who planned to sell them. With the evidence gathered, the police issued restraining orders against the men, prohibiting them from approaching the property or the couple. The sense of danger that loomed over the cabin finally dissipated, allowing Kenneth and Alicia to relax. On the last night before returning to the city, the couple made a decision. The dog and her puppies could not be left behind. They would become part of the family. When the season came to an end, Kenneth, Alicia, the dog, and the puppies departed together. The cabin fell silent once more, but this time, the ending was a happy one. Get ready to be amazed by what this pit bull did to protect its family in an extreme situation. Click on the card that's appearing on your screen. It's an emotional story that will touch your heart and stay with you.